Good evening and welcome to day 4 of School of the Cross. Every year at this time of year on Good Friday, we take the Micro Museum down to main campus. We gather the members together in all 4 campuses and really across the nation in all of our branch churches. And we sit down from 9 o'clock in the morning till a little after 5 every evening. And we just walk through what Jesus Christ has done for us. Now, this year with the lockdown, we did not want to change that. So instead of having it all at one time, what we said is, let's just edit the 9 hours down to about 5 hours. So thank you to Brother Jong and his folks. They've worked so hard at all the editing and cutting things and making decisions on what to cut. No, they didn't ask me. They just went ahead and did it. But they worked really, really hard to put all this together. And really, folks, I had to give a special shout out to Brother Jong because I would not be able to sit down with you in your homes every morning or every evening if it wasn't for Brother Jong. I mean, he has sacrificed so much just to make sure that every day we're able to sit there and talk with you and encourage you and comfort you and help you grow your faith and keep pointing you to Jesus. This is what it's all about. I want to open tonight with Psalms chapter 91. I'm going to read to you from the New Living Translation tonight. Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. This I declare about the Lord. He alone is my refuge and my place of safety. He is my God, and I trust in him. For he will rescue you from every trap and protect you from the deadly disease. He will cover you with his feathers. He will shelter you with his wings. His faithful promises are your armor and your protection. All the frontliners, you remember that, whether you work in a grocery store or you're a doctor or you work in a bank or you're a security guard or a policeman. His faithful promises are your armor and your protection. Do not be afraid of the terrors of the night, nor the arrow that flies in the day. Do not dread the disease that stalks in the darkness, nor the disaster that strikes at midday. Though 1,000 fall at your side, though 10,000 are dying around you, these evils will not touch you. Just open your eyes and see how the wicked are punished. If you make the Lord your refuge, if you make the Most High your shelter, no evil will conquer you. No plague will come near your home, for he will order his angels to protect you wherever you go. They will hold you up with their hands so that you will not even hurt your foot on a stone. You will trample upon lions and cobras. You will crush fierce lions and serpents under your feet. The Lord says, I will rescue those who love me. I will protect those who trust in my name. When they call on me, I will answer. I will be with them in trouble. I will rescue and honor them. I will reward them with a long life and give them my salvation. One of the beautiful truths that we've talked about so many times is that there's no seniority in Christianity. These promises don't work because you've been a Christian for 20 years and your faith has grown. He's the same God if you've been born again for 5 seconds than if you've been born again for 50 years. He treats you the same just because you love him. There's no seniority in this. Do you remember the parable that Jesus told of the farmer? And he sent the laborers out into the harvest field during harvest time. And he said, now, I'll pay you what's right. When they all came back and he gave them all the same amount. He said, it doesn't matter whether you went out first or you came in last, I'll pay you the same amount. There's no difference in the rewards. You need to understand, God does not have a seniority system or a maturity system of blessing. If you love him, if you're his child, his promises are true for you. All right, let's open up our hearts and spend some time in worship.
Shakes the whole earth with holy thunder, who leaves us breath.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Now, let me lay out where we're going to be going over the next few days. Tonight and tomorrow night, we're going to finish School of the Cross. Saturday night, we're going to bring you the beautiful Ignite the Moment. And one of the main reasons for this is to keep your faith for the future, for the dreams that God has for you. And then on Sunday, we're going to have the beautiful musical for you, The Witness, reminding ourselves that we have a nation to touch and we have a world to touch for Jesus. Now tonight, you say, what about next week, Pastor? Next week, I'm really going to begin to teach you what is not the new normal, what is God's requirements. So we're going to have some fun with that. This new normal that everybody talks about, we're going to be punching a few holes in that theologically. Right now, tonight, last night we really spent a lot of time talking about the plot to kill Jesus, and we talked about the betrayal of Jesus. Tonight, we're going to begin to focus on his arrest there in the Garden of Gethsemane. Those of you who have been with us to Israel, you stood there among the trees that, maybe not that tree, but the roots of that tree were there at that time. Now, we are in the garden. The scene is set. We have the arrest. Now, let us take a look at what this garden looks like. We're walking down the Mount of Olives that Jesus walked up every night. You see where the Dome of the Rock is? That would have been the Temple of Jerusalem. The great graveyards, because the Jews believe that those are the people that are going to rise first when Messiah comes. This is the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, let me begin to show you where we are. This is Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. This is the road down the Mount of Olives. This is the Garden of Gethsemane. This is where we are. Jesus has just finished the Last Supper over here in the Essene corner. He either came out this gate and walked around, or he came through the city and came out, probably walked around. It would have been safer. Everybody say safer. So Jesus is here in the Garden of Gethsemane at this point in time. He enters into a great season of prayer. Now, they have a rock in the Garden of Gethsemane inside the Catholic Church there that I always like to go and look at. I don't like most Catholic churches, but I like to go look at this rock. You see this big rock? Tradition tells us that that is the actual rock that Jesus prayed upon in his last season of prayer when the disciples were sleeping. The Garden of Gethsemane in Jesus' day was probably owned by Mary, the mother of John Mark. It would have been a private place. If we can come back over here to our picture. Every night, Jesus was in the temple courts. He would leave the temple courts and come out this gate. He would come here to the Garden of Gethsemane, relax and pray for a little while. We'll see in just a few minutes. It was his favorite place to pray. Then he would go up this Mount of Olives. That would be a really tough walk because it really is steep. And then about 3 kilometers past that to the city of Bethany, where he would sleep and spend the night. Now, in this garden, when he's there to pray, there are incredible emotions that begin to flow through his heart. John 18, beginning with verse 1. When he'd finished praying, Jesus left his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. This is finished praying at the upper room for the Last Supper. They crossed the Kidron Valley. This is the Kidron Valley. So either they crossed it this way or they crossed it this way. They crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was an olive grove, and he and his disciples went into it.
Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus often had met with the disciples there. So Judas came to the grove, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and Pharisees, and they were carrying torches and lanterns and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it that you want?" Now notice the phrase, Jesus knowing all that was going to happen to him. Ulit natin. Jesus knowing all that was going to happen to him. Jesus was not ignorant of what was coming. He knew the suffering. He knew the scourging. He had seen people hang on crosses all of his life. I mean, these Romans had been around for 150, 200 years. He had seen the crucifixions. He had seen the scourgings. He knew. And I've often thought, what did Jesus feel like when he was a young man and he saw people being scourged by the Romans? I've often wondered what Jesus thought as a young man when he walked up to Jerusalem and the Romans used to like to hang the rebels on the streets outside coming in the city. So you had to walk by this wall of people suffering and dying. I've often wondered how Jesus felt as a young man because he knew all that was going to happen to him. There was no ignorance. There was no spontaneity. Jesus knew all of this. You say, well, why did he keep going for it? For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. Sometimes, you have to go through a hard time, but for the joy set before you. Everybody say, for the joy set before us. Sometimes you've got something hard you have to go through for the kingdom. You know this is going to hurt, but for the joy set before you. Now Jesus began to be a little emotional. He'd experienced these emotions earlier in the first Holy Week. John chapter 12, verse 27, "Now my heart is troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very hour I have come." So early in the Holy Week, these emotions began to be stirred. But Jesus controlled the emotions. Jesus did what? He didn't walk around weeping, "I'm going to die here." He controlled his emotions. And he ministered to those people for 4 days. He healed the sick. He opened blind eyes. He taught the people. He stayed in control of his emotions. He did what? But now, it's the time of the arrest. Matthew 26, beginning with verse 36, Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee with him and began to be sorrowful and troubled. Mark 14:33, began to be distressed and troubled. Now notice the word began. Everybody say began. One of the things I hate about Holy Week movies is they make Jesus look depressed. Jesus is always walking around like a puppy dog somebody just took the food away from. That's not Jesus. Jesus was full of joy by the Holy Ghost. Now, he's fully God, but he's also fully man. And he knows he's got some really rough hours ahead. He knows there's not going to be anything good about the next 10 or 12 hours. He knows this is going to be, everybody say 10 or 12, really bad hours. He knows this is going to really, really hurt. Now, he's controlled his emotions from the beginning of the week. Now he lets these emotions flow. He began to be sorrowful. He began to be troubled. He began to be distressed. But he never lost control of his emotions. Luke chapter 22, beginning with verse 1. Now the feast of unleavened bread called the Passover was approaching, and the chief priests and teachers of the law were looking for some way to get rid of Jesus, and they were afraid of the people. And Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. Now, here is Jesus at the Last Supper. He gives his back to Judas. He's not afraid of Judas. But he doesn't sit there and cry at dinner. I mean, if you will read through the sermon and the prayer, John 14, John 15, John 16, John 17, and realized he prayed that prayer and he taught that sermon to his disciples, knowing in a few hours he's going to be arrested and the pain's going to begin. Knowing that Satan is laying right behind his back. Jesus did not run amok. Jesus' emotions did not run amok. He stayed in control. But in the garden, he began to be sorrowful, troubled. Matthew 26, verse 38, he said, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Mark 14:33, deeply distressed. And maybe the most telling verse of all, Luke 22, verse 44, "And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground." Wow. Doctors and psychologists tell us that this does happen to people, rarely, but it is when the stress and the pressure is so great that the capillaries in the surface of their skin begin to break from the pressure and the stress in their life. And Jesus is there praying in the garden. The emotions of that prayer, Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Loud cries and tears. His time at that rock in the garden was not a polite place of prayer. That place in the garden, he went there to be alone. He left most of the disciples way behind him where they would not hear. He only took the inner court with him. And there he began to cry out to God. Loud cries and tears. Everybody shout, loud cries and tears. How many of you have ever prayed to God with loud cries and tears? Would you raise your hand? You're pouring out your soul to God. And the stress got so great that the capillaries began to break in his skin. He poured the emotions out to God. Everybody say, to God. Mark 14:36, Abba, Father. Everybody say, Abba, Father. Say it again. Hebrews 5, verse 7, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. Jesus did not vent his emotion on his disciples. Jesus did not vent his emotions on the inner circle. Jesus vented his emotions to the Father. Who did he vent his emotions to? Now again, you look at this, at the contrast of strong leadership versus the weak leadership. Here is a strong leader. He did not vent his tears and his emotions before the people who followed him. And this new modern world about, the leaders want to show their vulnerability. No. Jesus showed his emotions to the Father. Jesus came before the Father with loud cries and tears. He said, Father, and listen, people would say, oh, Jesus didn't have any faith. He's going to die for me and you. I think he had faith. Listen to him, though. Mark 14:36. Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not I will, but what you will. Now here's a great truth you need to learn. Faith tempers possibility thinking with God's will. Can God turn Pastor Marlon into a duck? I'm asking a question. Can God turn Pastor Marlon into a duck? I can't hear you. Yeah, is he going to? No. Can God turn me into a German Shepherd? No. Can God turn me into a poodle? I hate poodles. My daughter has a poodle. She's laughing at me right now. Can God turn me into a little poodle? Yes. Is God going to? You see, faith understands what God can do. Father, all things are possible. How many things are possible? Can God put money in your ATM account? Is God going to? No, he's going to bless the work of your hands. Faith understands with God, you can do anything. But faith also understands, not my will, but your will be done. Did you get that? Everybody say, faith knows God can do anything. But faith wants God's will. Faith submits itself to God. 3 times he prays, Father, not my will, but your will be done. I remember back in the 80s, people used to go around and say, if you pray for something more than once, you don't have faith. And I remember thinking, how can people say that? So one of these preachers was saying it one time, and I said, did Jesus have faith? Oh, yes, he's the author and finisher of our faith, praise God. I said, well, he prayed the same prayer in the garden 3 times. He prayed for the blind man twice. Did Jesus have a problem activating his faith that day? No. Brothers and sisters, you have to be careful with fatty doctrines. Read the Bible every day. Jesus prayed the same prayer 3 times, and this was a prayer of commitment. A young man came to me and said, Pastor Summerall, I don't understand. I felt God called me to the ministry, but I responded to him and I told him I'd do anything he asked me to do, but now all of a sudden I don't feel that call anymore. I said, when was the last time you prayed a prayer of commitment? He said, what do you mean? I said, every day of my life I pray a prayer of commitment. Every day of my life I said, Jesus, I want your will. Every day of my life I come before the Father and say, Lord, whatever I have, you have. Whatever I can do, please. If there's any work that nobody else in the whole world wants to do, give it to me, Jesus, I'll do it. I want your will. Every day of my life. It's part of my normal devotions. It's just what I've done since I got born again. I said, you prayed a commitment prayer one time and forgot it. Even Jesus prayed the prayer of commitment 3 times. Are we still here? Sometimes the reason your commitment is dying is because you're not dying. Did you hear what I just said? Sometimes the reason your commitment is dying is because you're not dying. When you die daily, you live committed. And I'm not talking about fish. You didn't get my joke. Dying. Slow take up on the joke. I want to lighten this up a little bit. A little sugar helps the medicine go down. Everybody say, if my commitment is dying, that means I'm not dying daily. We are now in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus has prayed the prayer. But there's a truth that we need to understand about this exact period of time. Luke 22, verse 53, Jesus said, every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. This is what he spoke when the people came to arrest him. But this is your hour. This is your what? He did not say day. He did not say season. He did not say year. This is your hour. The short duration of time when darkness reigns. Now, there are seasons. There are periods of time when darkness is allowed to reign. This does not mean that darkness has control of us. John 14, verse 30, Jesus said, I will not speak with you much longer, for the prince of this world is coming, and he has no hold on me. He has no what? So we are not saying that this is a season in which Satan can control us. We are not saying that this is a season when miracles cannot happen. Because in that season when darkness reigned, Jesus put an ear back onto the slave Malchus's head. An incredible miracle took place, and nerves were recreated, and he could hear again. So we are not saying that darkness reigns means Satan has control of us. We are not saying when darkness reigns that miracles will not occur. We're just saying that that is a season when darkness exercises its force. Everybody say, darkness exercises its force. Now let's enter into this period when darkness exercises its force. Jesus and the apostles have come to the Garden of Gethsemane to rest. It's been their normal pattern all week long. They would come there in the evening, they would rest, they would pray, and then they would climb back up that very steep mountain. And when you walk down that mountain and you get to the Garden of Gethsemane at the bottom and you realize Jesus walked up it. I have never walked up the Mount of Olives. Sweetheart, have you ever walked up it? You'd like to? Not, you can do it with Shasha, not me. Maybe we'll ask Samir to do it next time. Samir was our guy on this last trip. He climbed the sycamore tree. He ran to the top of the tell at Beth Shan and carried all the camera equipment. He ran to the top of the mountain above Gideon Springs. Maybe we'll ask him to walk up it and see how long it takes. He's in shape. But Jesus walked up it every night. But you can understand why he rested for a little bit there, and they'd spend some time in prayer every evening in the Garden of Gethsemane. But now, Judas has been missing a lot. And you always have to be careful when somebody goes missing a lot. Everybody say, absent frequently. He's been Satan-possessed since Tuesday. This is now Thursday night. Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. Somehow, if we can put this up for a second, somehow, in getting from here to here, Judas disappeared again. And so when you get over here to the Garden of Gethsemane, you have 11 apostles, and we have one apostle who's missing. Because he probably stopped by Caiaphas' house or Annas' house, one of the two, and picked up the guys to come arrest Jesus with. So somehow between the Essene community and getting here to the Garden of Gethsemane, Judas has disappeared again, and when he shows up next time, he shows up with a crowd. Matthew 26, verse 47. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and elders of the people. Everybody say, sent. Notice they didn't come and do their dirty work themselves. One of the things you learn about weak men, we talked about weak men earlier, one of the things you learn about weak men is plausible deniability. If this is Judas doing this, they can say, listen, it's one of his own people that turned against him. If there's an uproar from the crowds of the people, they can say, listen, this is not our fault. This was a problem of Jesus's, one of Jesus's own close people. So very plausible deniability. So he has stopped someplace and picked up a crowd to come with him. And there's a principle here. Beware when out-of-place people arrive. Everybody say, beware when out-of-place people arrive. Now, in this mixed crowd, we find a well-armed group of people, Matthew 26:47, Mark 14:33, and we find a contingent of soldiers. Verse 3 of John 18, Judas came to the grove guiding a detachment of soldiers. So he has a group of volunteers sent representing the high priests, plural, and he has a detachment of soldiers. Now, how did Judas know where Jesus was going? If he disappeared while everybody was coming over here, and he picked up a crowd, how did he know where Jesus was going to go? He wasn't with him. He didn't go there and then leave and come back. There wasn't enough time for that. How did he know? Well, John 18, verse 1. When he'd finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples, crossed the valley of Kidron. On the other side, there was an olive grove, and he and his disciples went into it. Now, Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus often met there with his disciples. Luke 22, verse 39, Jesus went as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. Everybody say, as usual. Now here's a principle. Your knowability creates the opportunity for betrayal. Everybody say, my knowability creates the opportunity for betrayal. Now, this is something that nobody likes, but you have to learn to deal with. The fact that you are so transparent and the fact that you are so knowable is what creates the opportunity for people to betray you. But you can't live. Jesus could not be the Passover lamb who is transparent, the leaven of no leaven, the sincerity. Jesus could not be the sincere, transparent Savior and not be knowable. Now, as a leader, everybody say, as a leader. As a leader, you have to be knowable. But being knowable is what creates the opportunity for betrayal, because people know your weaknesses. They know exactly when and how to attack you and to hurt you. Now, in this season when darkness reigns, or this hour when darkness reigns, I want you to notice the Savior's strength. Now, I've already showed you his strength in that he gives his back to Satan. And forgive me, I just keep saying that because I love it. Jesus was not in any way intimidated by Satan possessing Judas. Everybody say, no intimidation. You know, this is going to happen, I know. I'm just going to give you my back because I don't feel like smelling your breath. I know you're in there, but you don't scare me. You can have my back. I won't even give you my front. You can have my back. I'm not afraid of you. Now look at Jesus' strength. Luke 22, verse 47, while he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and a man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them, and he approached Jesus to kiss him. And Judas asked him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? He didn't break down into an emotional, oh, how could you do this to me, Judas? Judas, are you betraying me with a kiss? I mean, everybody say, strong. Say it again. And then they walk up and he said, who is it that you want? John 18, verse 7. This is one of my favorite passages in the Bible. Who is it that you want? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. I told you I am he. Now, brothers and sisters, when he said, I am he, let me give you the rest of the verse on that. John 18, verse 5. Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. I am he, Jesus said. And Judas the betrayer was standing there with them. When Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. They did what? When Jesus said, I am he, the power of the presence hit them and they all fell to the ground. Now, I don't believe in slaying in the Spirit, okay? The Holy Spirit doesn't slay anybody. But I do believe that people are overcome by the presence. How many of you have ever been touched by the presence and you just hit the floor, diba? Well, when Jesus said, I am he, all of these soldiers hit the floor. All of these people who came to arrest him hit the floor. And the funniest one, where is Satan? In Judas. And where is Judas? On the floor. Every knee shall bow. Folks, you got to get it into your head. Jesus was not a martyr. Jesus was in control. He was in control of his emotions. He said, no man taketh my life, I lay it down. He was in control of his emotions. He was in control of his arrest. They came to arrest him. He said, I am he. Boom! They're all on the floor. He had to wait for them to get up. That was very nice of him. He waited for them to get up off the floor. Ooh, what happened? Are you understanding? It's one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Jesus never surrendered control. He is Lord. Everybody shout, he is Lord. Everything he did for us on the cross, he did because he chose to do it because of love. These people who come to act like they're in charge and they're in control, they were not in charge and they were not in control. Not for an instant. I am he. Boom. They're all on the ground. Now, he says, John 18, verse 9, this happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. I have not lost one of those that you gave me. Jesus did not want any of the disciples to be arrested and hurt. Remember, he's in control. So he walks out. He's been praying. He does not do people power. He does not send James and John ahead, the sons of thunder. He does not send Peter out there with a sword. He goes out and greets these guys. Who are you looking for? Jesus of Nazareth. I'm him. Boom, on the floor. This happened so that what he prophesied, he did not lose one. Everybody say, none of the disciples were to be hurt. Jesus had this planned out in a way so that none of the disciples would have been arrested, none of the disciples would be hurt. But Peter, bless his heart, me and Peter, we're alike. Peter pulled out his sword, Matthew 26, verse 51 and 22, drew it out and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Now, one of these swords you'll find right down here. This is a Roman sword from the Jesus period. So he pulls this thing out. He's going for the kill. You don't cut off the ear. Okay. He's going for the head. He's going for the kill. He's going for the what? He's probably going to take his head off. He just gets the ear. Jesus, stop. Everybody stops. I mean, it's about to be a full-blown battle. Stop. And to make sure everything stops, Jesus reaches down, picks up the ear, pops it back on. Now I got news for you. Nobody's reaching for their sword anymore. Everybody's going. They've never seen an ear reattached. So the whole, Jesus, and here's a great principle. Jesus uses a miracle to get back control of the situation. Peter's emotion messed it up. Jesus used a miracle to stop the problem, to get back control of the situation. And then again, he looks at them. He said, put your sword back in place. And then he said, no more of this. Luke 22, verse 51, he touched the man's ear and healed them. And then he says, now, gentlemen, you came for me. Let these men go. Now, the disciples then all begin to flee. Matthew 26, verse 56, then all the disciples deserted him and ran. Mark 14, 50, then everyone deserted and fled. Everybody ran. Everybody ran. Mark 14, verse 51 is interesting. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. Now, who is the young man? Who wrote the book? Mark. Who is the young man? It's Mark. He went out there, heard the commotion, wraps a sheet around himself, and loses his sheet, and then he's doing a UP running away. Now, they all ran because Peter had begun the fight, and Jesus just said, stop all of this. In the confusion, all the disciples got away. Now, at this point, Jesus is brought from the Garden of Gethsemane, and first he goes to here, the Hasmonean Palace, Annas' house. Now, how they took him here, the scripture is silent. They could have brought him in through the eastern gate, through the temple courts, and then down this special bridge that comes straight down into the rich area. Now, this bridge is very private. This bridge was built because, remember, this is the rich area of town. The rest of this is the poor area of town. The rich people did not want to talk to the poor people when they went to the temple. So the rich people had their own skyway. And they could go straight over the top of the poor people into the temple courts. But it would have also been private. So some scholars believe they brought him through the temple courts and then down the skyway bridge, so to speak, into Annas' house. We don't know. But he was first taken to the house of Annas. Now, Annas' house is a palatial mansion. Remember, this guy is a gazillionaire, all right? He probably has the largest house in Jerusalem outside of Herod. So probably the second biggest mansion in all of Israel belongs to him. Herod would have his palace. They have actually discovered this house, and they have begun excavations on it. And this is what they have found thus far. When they tried to make a drawing of what they thought his house actually looked like, with the double pools, which would mean extreme wealth, this is what it would have looked like. So he is brought to Annas' palace. Now again, how he got from here to here, we don't know. Again, most speculate he came in through the eastern gate, comes through the temple courts, comes down the bridge into this area. He could have come through the Kidron Valley and through the gate right here. They could have brought him all the way around this way, but probably not, because that would have been a long way to walk. And these kind of people usually like to take the shortcut, so we don't know how he got there. But first he is taken to the house of Annas. Everybody say Annas. John 18, beginning with verse 12. Then a detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him, and they brought him first to Annas, who is the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest, that year. Everybody say that year. Remember, they just swapped it back and forth among the family. Verse 19. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Now, so he's looking at two things. If we can come back here. Annas is looking at who are the disciples, and I want to know about your teaching. This, remember, is the kingmaker. He is concerned about cleaning up the Jesus mess. Everybody say, clean up the Jesus mess. Now, Jesus looks at Annas and says, verse 20, I've spoken openly to the world. I've always taught in the synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I've said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said. Now, please, remember, for 4 days, he's been in the temple courts, teaching from early morning until sundown. For 4 days, the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, the Herodians, they've all tried to humiliate him with trick questions for the whole week. They've all tried to embarrass him and bring him down. These people are well aware of everything Jesus was teaching. But Jesus says, I have said nothing in secret. When he said this, John 18:22, one of the officials nearby struck him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. Principle. You learn a lot about people by their reactions. By their what? By their what? For instance, one of my favorite things is to walk up to young people and say, how's your boyfriend? How's your girlfriend? Instantly by their reaction, you can tell if there is a secret on. Because their face just, how'd you know, Pastor? You learn more by watching reactions than you do by listening to words oftentimes. Now look at their reaction. Jesus said, I've done nothing in secret. Slap him upside the face. In other words, these people are really touchy about secrets, because this was a group of people who lived secrets. Everybody say, they lived secrets. Now, once they finish with him, now we're going to have to move from Annas' house, and we're going to have to go down to the house of Caiaphas. Now, Caiaphas is the high priest that year. Everybody say that year. Remember, the family swapped it back and forth between the brothers and the brother-in-laws, the sons-in-laws. Verse 18 of John 18. Verse 24 of John 18. Then Annas sent him still bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now, why would they keep him tied up? Have you ever asked yourself the question, why? Had Jesus ever hurt anybody? Why were they afraid of him? He cleansed the temple twice. He kicked over the money changers' tables. They knew this was a strong man. This was a what? They were weak men. He was a strong man. He would take on everybody in the temple all by himself. Strong man. But he never hurt anybody. Remember, Proverbs 28:1. The wicked flee when no one pursues them. Now, the official trial begins before Caiaphas and the unofficial. We start with the unofficial. We start with the what? Everybody say unofficial. Now remember, at the Garden of Gethsemane, we have finished, this is called the Essenes Gate, we have finished the Last Supper. What time is it? Daylight or dark? It's dark. It's evening. Is that correct? Now, somehow Jesus got from here to here. He's prayed for a long time. The crowd has come out. They've arrested him. And he got from here back to here. It's really late. Everybody say, really late. Now, while Jesus is being brought here, Caiaphas sends out word through the community. Because remember, all these guys on the Sanhedrin court are Sadducees. These guys all live in the rich area of town. So he sends out word, and they all begin to gather together at his house. Now, you have to understand that this is illegal under Roman law. There were no gatherings allowed after dark. So all of these guys had to sneak to Caiaphas' house. Everybody say, one by one, sneaking around. Now, when this false trial started, when the Sanhedrin gathered together in Caiaphas' house in the middle of the night, so the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin, Matthew 26, verse 59, were looking for false testimony. They were what? They were looking for truth. They were looking for false testimony. Now, finally, he said, if you destroy the temple, I'll rebuild it in 3 days. I mean, they're looking for stuff, but I like what Mark 14, verse 56 says. Many testified falsely against him, but their false statements did not agree. One of the ways to recognize lies don't integrate with life. Everybody say, lies do not integrate in life. You just start asking a few other questions and you realize, wait a minute, this lie does not fit in the rest of the puzzle of life. Everybody say, does not fit in the puzzle of life. A man came to me one time when I was saying something about somebody. I said, that can't be true. He said, well, it is true. I said, it can't be true. He said, well, why can you say it can't be true? I said, because I knew where he was on that day. Well, how do you know where he was? He was with me. Your lie does not fit with the other puzzle pieces of life. Lies never agree. Everybody say, lies do not agree. Now, the only charge that stuck is his claim to be the Son of God. Mark 14, verse 61. Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, Jesus said. Everybody say, I am. Now, one of the things that you have to learn, Jesus never answered lies, but he never denied truth. When people accused him of lies, he never answered, whether it's Pilate or whether it's Sanhedrin. Now, this is something you need to get a hold of in life. You can never defend yourself against a lie. Everybody say, I cannot defend myself against a lie. If people want to believe it, they're going to believe it. But there is no defense against a lie. How do you prove a lie is a lie? Jesus and Paul, following Jesus' example, never answered a lie. But when people ask him truth, are you the Son of God? Yes. He would answer truth, but he would never answer a lie. He would answer truth even though it meant they would kill him, but he would never answer a lie. Now, there's some interesting things that are revealed in this religious trial about a lack of justice. Caiaphas is the high priest. He acts as the prosecutor, and he acts as the judge. Everybody say, moving quickly. He acts as the high priest, he acts as the prosecutor, he acts as the judge. The trial is done illegally at night. Jesus has no defense counsel, which under Jewish law he should have received. Everything about this trial is a scam. Everybody say, kangaroo court. We all know what that means. It's just a kangaroo court. There's nothing real about it. The high priest is the prosecutor. The high priest is the judge. The high priest is looking for lies. It's an illegal trial held in the middle of the night. Jesus has no defense counsel. But now where's Peter during all of this? Well, Matthew 26, verses 31 to 35. Peter's really trying to keep his word. Everybody say, really trying. Now again, I won't read all the verses. Matthew 26, 58, Mark 15, 54, Mark 14, 54, Luke 22, 54, John 18, verses 15 to 18. Peter is really trying to keep his word. When Jesus said, Peter, you're all going to fall away because of me, Peter said, Lord, I'll go to jail with you, I'll die with you. And Jesus said, before the cock crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. Peter's really trying to keep his word. But he can't do it. And this is the courtyard of Caiaphas. Right there. Stop there, back up. Go backwards. Can you go backwards? Yeah, there we go. You see the big stones here? A little bit more. You see the big stones? These are all the stones of the courtyard. This is the area where Peter would have been and the girls would have been, the little servant girls. This is where the fire would have been. You say, why did they have a fire? How many of you have been with us to Israel? Put your hand up. Does it get cold in Jerusalem? It gets cold. People say, Pastor, it's so cold. I said, this is good. It teaches you what Jesus lived through. So here's Peter. He's got a fire. He's trying to warm himself by the fire and stay warm. And he just keeps denying Jesus. So finally, Jesus is on the rooftop of Caiaphas' house. The trial is taking place. That's their biggest open area. And finally, Jesus looks over. His eyes and Peter's eyes meet as the cock crows. And Peter runs out into the night weeping. Now, I want you to notice something about Peter. Peter did not betray Christ. Peter denied Christ. Everybody say, not betrayal, denial. There is a difference. Jesus looked at Peter, and he went outside, Luke 22, verse 61 and 62, and he went outside and wept bitterly. Now, when it came time for Peter to return, returning from denial is one thing. Returning from betrayal is a different story. Peter did not deny. Peter did not betray. Peter denied. To return from denial means that you have to face the truth of your relationship and get forgiveness. Everybody say, face the truth of my relationship. Peter, do you love me more than these? Jesus faced him with his relationship. Now, that night, Jesus is put in the dungeon. There we go. A little bit farther. Got some church members down there. That's me in my hat. There we go. Stop. That's me with my hat. Really is. It's how you keep your head warm in Jerusalem. Now, this dungeon, there's a hole in the roof that Jesus would have been let down through. After they finish this illegal trial, all these Sanhedrin guys sneak out of the house one by one and go home so the Roman soldiers don't catch them. Then early the next morning, everybody say, sunrise. Soon as the first gleams of the sun begin to come up, sunrise, they come back. Jesus is taken out of this hole, and he's taken to the Sanhedrin court for the official legal trial. Now, every year, this is one of the first places I ever went in Israel. Every year, I like to go down there, and I love to take our buses one by one down there, and I share with them a very simple sermon. I tell them how Jesus prayed the prayer of commitment in the Garden of Gethsemane. Now Jesus, when all these people go home, he lives his commitment and stays in this dungeon. Now, brothers and sisters, I want you just to close your eyes and think for a minute. Everybody else has gone home. He's been slapped, he's been spit on, he's been lied about. They drop him through this hole in the floor, and it would not have been a nice place. I mean, rats would be down there, dead bodies decaying, human waste and filth, and Jesus is standing in it. And he stands in it for the rest of the night. Probably around 5, maybe 4 hours, maybe 5 to 6 hours, but 6 hours would be tops, 4 hours would be about right, someplace in that period. He's there all by himself. Now, folks, when you're alone and you face your own thoughts, that's when you find out who you really are. As Jesus, in his aloneness, no disciples, no Peter, no anybody, all by himself in that dungeon, he could have walked out of there. I'm sorry, he could have just blasted a hole in the top and walked out of there. But he stayed there because he loved you. Did you hear what I just said? He stayed there, knowing the pain that would begin the next morning, knowing the pain that was soon going to begin in just a few hours. He's there all by himself. He has no regrets. He has no second guessing. He has prayed his commitment, and now he lives his commitment out of love. But now the first gleams of sun begin to come. They let a rope down through the hole in the top. They pull him out of the filth and the squalor, and they take him to the temple courts. Now, where they take him in Herod's temple is this room right here. This is the Sanhedrin court. This is where the ruling body, what you would call the boardroom of Judaism, meets. It was a room that is called the stone chamber. It looks like this. And just put this up and leave it for a minute. Stone chamber. This is the stone chamber. Now just leave that up for a while. Matthew 27, verse 1, early in the morning, all the chief priests and elders of the people came to a decision to put Jesus to death. Mark 15:1, very early in the morning. Luke 22, verse 66, at daybreak. At when? So that first Good Friday started at daybreak. These guys were wasting no time. Jesus had to be dead before sundown. Everybody say dead before sundown. Why? Because Shabbat begins. They have just finished Passover. They have one day to do the deed, the day of preparation. They have one day to do the deed, and then Shabbat begins. They know they just have a few hours to get this thing working. So these guys are up at daybreak, and they meet together. Now, this is exactly what the Sanhedrin court would have looked like. The high priest sits on his little throne. The other guys sit around on stone bleachers. And then the accused is stood in the middle of them. And that's where Jesus was on the first Good Friday morning, while these men, again, listened to the lies about him.
There stands an endless mercy tree. Every broken, weary soul, come find your rest and be made whole. Stripes of blood that stain its flame, shed to wash away our shame. The scars, pure love released, salvation by the mercy tree. In the sky between two thieves hung the blameless Prince of Peace, bruised and battered, scarred and scorned, sacred head pierced by our thorn. It is finished was his cry. Perfect Lamb was crucified. His sacrifice our victory. Our Savior chose the mercy tree. Hope went dark that violent day.
The whole earth quakes and love's display.
Reading silent in the ground, his body born for heaven's and every tear he'll wipe away. No more pain or suffering. Oh, praise Him for mercy train that has died and love has won. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Jesus Christ has overcome. He has risen from the dead. Death has died and love has won. Hallelujah, Jesus Christ has overcome. He has risen from the He's risen from the dead.
Thank you for joining us on today's School of the Cross with the Under Shepherd of the Cathedral of Praise, Pastor David E. Sumrall. Join us every day this week from Monday to Friday at 7 p.m. as Pastor Sumrall walks us through the events that transpired during the first Holy Week. On Holy Weekend, catch Ignite the Moment the Musical on Saturday 7 p.m. and The Witness the Musical on Easter Sunday 7:30 a.m., 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. For more information, visit us on www.cathedralofpraise.com.ph.